Hey, welcome back to Black Lab Garage. We're doing something a little different today. We're doing something really, and honestly, it's near and dear to my heart. Let me show you what we're doing. That is a Ferguson TO-30. You see, I grew up using a TO-30. I grew up on a dairy farm and had almost 300 acres. And all we had was that 165 that you see me use to bale hay and stuff, and a Ferguson TO-30. Of course, I was stuck on the TO-30 most of the time. So those tractors are very near and dear to my heart, both the Ferguson 20s and the 30s. And well, the story behind this one, it was being hauled off for scrap. It has a bad motor. I mean, it's kind of sad because the motor was actually new. It had been rebuilt, but the oil pump went out on it, and it took the main bearings and stuff out with it. But it was in too good a shape to go to scrap. So what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to fix it. But right now, I'm not going to take the crank out and have it turned and all that. Let me show you plan B, C, E, F, subarticle C, section 2. Yeah. Meet Ferguson TO-30 number 2. A good friend of mine had this tractor. He got it in on a trade. But this tractor, as you can see, it's pretty well shot. You see the radius arms and everything are bent. But it has one thing going for it. It runs like a sewing machine. Looking that bad, it runs like a sewing machine and has good oil pressure. It only has one problem. Just one. Let me show you what that problem is. I mean, I know the water pump is bad on this tractor, but it has another problem. Let's crank it up. Let's see, turn the key on. May have to choke it, I'm not sure. Okay, now wait for it. See, it sounds good. See, it's starting to smoke a little bit. And gradually getting worse. And worse. See? It has good oil pressure, even idle and stuff. Remember I said it gets worse and worse? I wasn't kidding. So what's the game plan? We're going to take this engine and put it on this tractor. But I don't want a tractor that I have to keep outrunning the cloud of smoke on. Now remember I said this tractor had a new engine. Well, look at it. Well, it just so happens I have a stash of Ferguson parts that I've had for years. So we're going to switch engines, but we're going to drop another set of sleeves and pistons in that engine, a used set that I have. Will it stop the smoke? Will it get worse? Well, I really don't know. All we can do is try. So you ready for this experiment? Come on, let's get into it. Okay, first thing to do is get this big honking bumper off of here. That's definitely not original to the tractor. But see, these, the whole hood tilts forward when you want to put gas and stuff in it. Well, obviously that's in the way. That's probably why there's no hood bolts in it, because they had taken them off so they could just take the hood off and put gas in it. Well, apparently that's been on there for a while. Oh, there's one bolt. And there's the other one. Big ugly bumper gone. Now let's get the radiator off here. I gotta be careful with this one. This is actually a new radiator, which is why I have to be careful with it. Oh, sadly, the new radiators are a whole lot thinner than the original. I mean, a whole lot thinner. Look at all the crap down in there. Now let's get this alternator off here. Somebody's put on here. Obviously they didn't come with alternators. Actually, first Massey Fergusons that I know of didn't come with alternators till the 1970s. Oh, and this tractor here is a 52 model, by the way. Now, let's take the water pump off of it. The reason I'm pulling the water pump is, well, we know that, and on the other tractor's bad. Maybe this one's good. We'll find out. I do have a new one, just in case. Well, it's a new old one. Alright, now we got to take, there's a bolt here, and one right back here. Got to take it loose so we can take this radius arm loose. That way we can unbolt the front axle, support and all, and just roll the whole thing forward. You don't have to do it that way, but I think that's, personally, I think that's the easiest way. I ended up having to take the foot plate off of that to get that lower bolt out. Sometimes you have to, sometimes you don't, but I had to on that one. So now I'll take the tire rod in loose. Alright. There we go. So now you got these 4 bolts on the support, or axle support I should say. Let's go ahead and spray them. Let it be soaking. Now that I've got a jack stand underneath the transmission housing here, we can go ahead and take these 4 bolts loose, because I've just barely got this front axle off the ground, but it is supported, so. One side loose. Jesus Christ, these bolts are long. And fine thread. Now, notice I didn't pull all the bolts all the way out. It's still holding the front axle there a little bit. So I'm going to get a cherry picker and some chains, and we'll grab a hold of it, pick up on it just slightly, and then roll it out there. Now we can pull the bolts the rest of the way out. And be careful because there's a shim on that side between the engine cradle and the engine. Now let's take the starter off of it. If we can get it off there. The reason I say that, most of the time the starter's been replaced and your newer starters are longer than the originals and you can't get them out without removing the distributor. I think this one is the original. I should be able to get it out without removing the distributor. We'll find out right here in a second. Yep. So now all we got to do is hook a chain to give this engine some support and remove the bell housing bolts. And that's got all the bolts out. Are y'all still with me? I didn't mean to knock these over. And the engine come out, it hit the stand. Sorry about that. But there we are. But it's hot, and I'm about to die for a drink right now. So I want to go inside and get something to drink, cool off for a minute. We'll come back out and start on the oven. Alright, so I've got the running engine on the stand now. And you can see here, this engine had been stuck at some point in time in its life, and somebody's got it unstuck and got it running, and that's probably why the rings are stuck in it. But we're going to take the rods and pistons out and change the sleeves and pistons to a good use set that I've got. Because, did I mention this is budget build? First I got to take the oil pan off. And Lord only knows what we'll find in here. And that's right in the way. Ooh. How on God's earth did it have good oil pressure? I don't know how, I just know that it did. Wow. I'm speechless. Wow. Alright. I mean, actually, considering how much dirt was in it, the bearings don't look bad. My God, that's the original bearings. Z120. That is the original bearings in this motor. Wow. So yeah, it's standard. Wow, I can't believe. I mean, I can because I'm looking at it, but that's just, wow. I'm just speechless. Remember number 3 had so much oil sitting on top of it? See, our oil ring stuck. That ring there is stuck. That one's halfway stuck. So there's part of the smoking problem. Number 2 piston. Ring stuck on it too. Alright. Got the front, might as well say main cap bolts loose, even though they go through the oil pump. That's also what holds your main cap down. Now sometimes there'll be shims between your oil pump and the main cap. If they are, hang on to those shims because that's what sets the proper amount of preload on these gears. Alright, get this lower pulley off. Now let's take the timing cover off. And the governor is in behind this timing cover. So this is a good chance to check out and see if your governor is still good or not. There is 2 dowel pins that also lock the timing cover in place. That's what's holding it right now, is the dowel pins. And back out there holding it good, let me just tell you. Oh, come on. There we go. Right there is your governor. And there's a bunch of balls in behind that. Hopefully you can see them on camera. You don't want to lose them. If you look real carefully, make sure that, I call them the fingers in between, aren't broke anywhere. If they're not, leave it alone. Now let's take this off. The bearing looks good too. Especially considering that is the original bearing. Now to get the rear main seal out, there's 2 bolts on the inside and then 1, 2, 3 on the outside. Yeah, it's pretty unique for its time that these engines used a 1-piece rear main seal. I don't know whose dog that is yapping, it's not mine. Now before I pull this lower timing gear off, I just want to show you, hopefully you can see it. The timing marks, there's 1 dot on this lower gear and there's 2 dots on the cam gear. Of course that 1 dot goes in between the 2 dots. Hopefully it shows up on camera for you, but that's how you time these 2 together. I was going to say, these gears usually come off fairly easy. But you have to take them off because the end play of the crank is set by thrust washers and shims. I'll show you it right here in a second. Alright, this retainer right here has a flat spot, so just turn it till the flat spot is in front of the cam gear and you can slide it off. And there's your shims for setting the end play. That's a thrust washer. This right here is a thrust washer. This is where it gets interesting. Why Continental did this, I don't know if anybody knows the answer. The Z120 engine used a front main bearing that had a flange on the inside, and the front of the crank rode against that flange. For some reason, when they went to the Z129 engine, and keep in mind the only difference between the 2 is the stroke of the crankshaft and the bore size. Still the same block casting and stuff. There's some differences, a little bit differences in the cylinder head, but I mean basically they will interchange. For some reason they went to this one, they used a fiber thrust washer and done away with the flange on the bearing. And over time, of course being fiber, it just gets hard and brittle, and crumbles, falls out, and then your crank starts walking back and forth. This is the first one I've ever seen that still had the fiber thrust washer in it. I'm kind of amazed by this, but we're not going to put it back together with that. Now that we've got the rear main cap bolts out, take a hammer, because these things will be fairly tight. Because the side seals our cotton rope. So we got to break it loose. There we go. The bearing shell stayed down in there. There you can see that cotton rope I was talking about. It's been in there so long it's just like cement basically. There you can see the end of it. But yeah, that's just cotton rope. There. Now then, pull the crank out. Just kind of wiggle your thrust washer back and forth because it's just got little pins holding it on there. That's the thrust washer on the outside. Like I said, there's another one on the inside, but now we can pick the crank up out of it. And right there's your shims, once again, I was telling you about. Make sure you hang on to them. Don't lose them. Alright, let's pull the governor out of it. This just pulls straight out. I was holding my hand there in case these balls decide to take off. That governor looks decent. When these governors get wore too much, they'll literally just fall out without loosening anything. That just means that the fingers they're just wore out and you need a new governor. This governor is actually pretty good. It all stayed together. Now there was some early, the TO-20 and early TO-30s had 4 big weights spaced evenly around it. It's what they call the flyweight type governor. And those work. This is what they call the Novi governor. As the old flyweight governors wear out, they were always replaced with these. But then of course later TO-30s came with these. So you could see the other style in yours possibly. And they work till they wear out and then they don't work. But yeah. Now let's pull the camshaft out of it. Turn it around a couple times just to make sure all the lifters are down. There's one there that's still stuck up kind of. Alright. And you ain't got to worry about nicking the cam bearings on these because they don't have cam bearings. They do make bearings. You have to take the block to the machine shop and they machine it to use the bearings, but from the factory, these have no cam bearings. They just ride, the camshaft just rides in the blocks. Now let's pull the lifters out of it and try to keep them in order. I brought me an arrow. That tells me they go towards the front, or they're in order towards the front of the engine. Come on, baby. There it is. That sleeve has been in there since 1952. So now what I need to do is take this and pressure wash it and clean it really, really good. Look at all the deposits around where the sleeves was. That's from running pond water in it for years and years. But see, if you don't get that out of there, that'll cause it to overheat. So I want to clean all this out, clean the outside up again. You know, try to get it as clean as possible. And then we're going to be ready to start putting it back together. I'll see you here in a few. Alright, we're ready to install the sleeves. The installation of these sleeves is pretty simple. You've got two O-rings that go here, but let me just stress, before you put the sleeves in, make sure you clean this groove, the inside and this groove, and down in the bottom, where the sleeve goes through at the bottom, make sure you clean it good. Then each sleeve has two O-rings. Alright, got the O-rings on. Now we get some tire lube, or you can use Vaseline or something. But I'm using tire lube. And just coat the O-rings really good because you don't want to tear them. Right, smear a little lube around the inside of it there. And try to go as straight as possible with it. Sometimes you gotta wiggle it, twist it just a little bit. Now once you get it through, make sure that your O-rings hadn't torn in half or anything, because you can see, and these are fine. And then just push it on in. If you're having to hammer them in, then you've got a problem. I mean, you can get a little block of wood and tap it that last little bit, but you should never have to hammer them, ever. Now let me put the rest of these sleeves in. Make sure that the main saddles are clean, and guess what? It's time to start putting main bearings in. Which, these main bearings look horrible, but I promise you they're new. So they look like they're used already, but they're really not. These are new old stock Michigan engine bearings. They're 2/1000ths oversized. And yes, I said 2/1000ths. Alright. Now we're going to polish the crank ourselves. I've got some, this is 240 grit here, I believe. Let me double check. Yes, 240. Spray a little lube on it. Well, it's a 240 emery cloth, I should say. After I go over it with the 240, I'll go back over it with 400. And all we're trying to do is just clean it up. If there's any like nicks sticking up in it, get them out of it. But this is a slow process, so I ain't gonna make you watch me polish all the crank, but you see how it's done. Like I said, I'm gonna go over the whole thing with 240 and then go back over it with 400. I'll check back in here in a few minutes. Alright, I'll take some carburetor cleaner Spray all the journals and stuff down real good. And then what you want to do also is spray through all the holes in the crank where the oil travels. And then what I do, I mean, yeah, I want to blow compressed air through it, but I like to take a pipe cleaner and run through them. Just to make sure that they're clean. Or if you got a brush that fits them, you can do that too. So, I'm going to clean this crank up, but you can see what I do. Spray with a carburetor cleaner and compressed air, a pipe cleaner, and I also take a clean rag and spray it again, wipe the journals out, just wipe the journals down to make sure that they're good and clean before we set it in on the new bearings. Now then, before I drop the crank in, remember we kept the lifters in order. So let's drop the lifters back in. Of course, I dip them in some oil there before I drop them down in there and make sure that they move freely. Now I've done put my assembly lube on the main bearing. So, now that our crank is clean, now wait a minute, we're not done. One thing I got to do. Thrust washer. See, there's a chamfer on it right here. There's a flat side and a chamfer. The chamfer on the inside of the block faces the inside of the crank. It's made to match up to that radius that's ground into the crank. See, that's what limits how far the crank can move back and forth. And it just goes in there and just floats. It doesn't pin like the one on the outside. This one just floats around in there. Now then, before we put the main caps on, you see these are new bearings. Of course, they've been around a long time, but I always like to take a lint-free rag and take some paint reducer. A lot of these bearings have a coating on them to keep them from corroding or anything while they're in storage. And these are old Michigan bearings, not even Michigan 77. These are Michigan bearings, so they've probably been in storage since 70s, late 60s. I don't know. I ain't sure when. I'm not sure when it went to Michigan 77, but it was before that. So clean them real good. Make sure your main cap's clean. And snap it in there. Put a little assembly lube on it. I like this style of assembly lube better. I like this kind of assembly lube better because the grease style, it clumps up and it'll start. It don't ever break down. It just stays in clumps and gets into the oil filter. Now I'm not going to torque it yet. I'm just going to snug ease down. Yeah. Of course, we can't tighten this one down until we put the oil pump and stuff on it. Look there. I can turn it by hand. That's a good sign. Alright. Let's slide the camshaft in. Once we got it lubed up. Like I told you before, you ain't got to worry much about damaging the cam bearings in this block. We don't have cam bearings. The block is the cam bearings. There we go. Just to show you how old these bearings are, there you go. Now let's take the cover off the oil pump. I use the impact. These screws are usually in there pretty tight. The oil pump actually looks like it's in pretty good shape. They do make kits to rebuild these oil pumps. And normally I would recommend that. But this one seems to be okay. Let's try and get that gear right there to come out. Yeah, it's not bad at all. Now pull the cotter pin out of it. And that's where your pressure relief valve is. We definitely got to get it cleaned up because you don't want your pressure relief valve getting stuck. There's the cap. Oh, look, our spring's broke. That's the first one I ever took apart that the spring was broke. Now if I can get the plunger out of it. Got it out. Stuck a bolt in it. Looks like it's been stuck for a while. So let's polish it up. Now I'd like to take a file and run across it, just make sure that it's flat. The original gasket on these was made out of lead. There we go. That's good enough. Alright, now on the other end of the plunger, since we got the cover back on, now on the other end of the oil pump, since we got the cover back on, drop the plunger in, and then drop the spring in. Then we've got this little cover here. Now, since I am using used parts, I'm going to put a washer in there just to shim it up a little bit, which will make it have more oil pressure. And then just put your cotter key through there. That's all you got to do. Now, put the oil pump back on. And drop the main caps back, or main bearing bolts back in. I can't talk today for some reason. Now let's go through here, and first time I'm going to torque it into 50. Now the book calls for 85 to 95. Of course, you know me, I always like to go on the higher side. Even though I have had this wrench calibrated recently just to make sure that it was still within spec. I'm going to go with 90. We'll go in the middle. Give my once over one more time. Alright. And now that we got the main caps torqued down, try to turn it over. No, I'm kidding. Look here. So, we're good. Oops. Sorry, didn't mean to hit the camera. We are good. Now then, these pistons have a floating pin because there's a bushing in the rod. Now, one thing I want to cover, it will depend on your pistons because some have an arrow to tell you which way to point them. Some have a notch at the bottom of the piston to tell you which way to point them, and some have nothing, and it doesn't matter which way you turn them. These are one of the nothing sets. There is no marking whatsoever, and I actually took a caliper and measured to each side to see if there's any offset. There is no offset, so these do not matter which way you turn them, but whatever pistons you have, you know, make sure you turn it the direction they need to go. But also the rod has to face a certain direction. You see that little hole right there? There's not a hole here, but there is a hole there. That hole, listen carefully, because a lot of people think that it goes towards the camshaft to oil it. It does not. It goes away from the camshaft and oils the thrust side of the cylinder wall. So make sure that you put this in with the oil hole in the rod facing away from the camshaft. Which, when the motor is flipped over, the camshaft, of course, is on the left side. So you'd want the oil hole facing to the right side. So now we got that covered. Get you some assembly lube. And check if your bushings are wore out in your motor, you can get them replaced. They're still readily available. Any machine shop can do it. Now take your piston and lube that pin up. And also lube the other wrist pin hole in the piston, like that. Okay, let's see. So numbers facing me, oil hole away. And just push it in. There we go. So I've got the clip in this side. These clips, this particular kind of wire clips, because there is some that use, some of the replacement pistons use a snap ring instead. But these, can you see how that, the end of it kind of springs up? Because you can turn it with it down or turn with it up. You want it with it up. But you put that in there. Just grab it with some needle nose. This is hard to do and show it on camera, but now then. See, just pop in there right then. They're not fun, but you can get them. Alright, now before we flip the motor over, let's go ahead and put the camshaft retaining plate on, or cam thrust plate, whatever you want to call it. A little assembly lube on the end of it. Then take one of the bolts, put a little Loctite on it, just to be safe. You don't have to, but I like to use it. Of course, that's mostly because I don't like stuff to come loose. And the other one. And then torque it to 15 to 20 foot-pounds. And there we go. Now let's put a new thrust washer on this side. Of course, it'd help if I'd turn it the right way. Just give it a little tap down on the stud sticking out. Now we got to check the crank end play, well, crankshaft end play. Now you remember those shims we took out of here? Well, clean them up and add them back in. And they do have a cutout in them to slide over the woodruff keys here. And once you have the shims on there, crank a little bit. About like that. Okay. And I'll have to get a hammer and take his timing gear back on. There we go. And make sure the gears are meshed up. And then put this oil slinger on. See, this is the one downside to this system of setting the end play. All this has to be on there in order to check it. And if it's wrong, you got to take it all back apart, either add or take shims out, and put it all back together and check it again. You know, and you just keep repeating that till you get it right. I know there's a keyway there. Now to check it, which you can use a dial indicator to do this. I have one, but why set it up when you can just use a feeler gauge? Take you a big screwdriver or a large pry bar, and you want to pry the crankshaft all the way forward. Then pry it all the way back. Then check it between the crank and that thrust washer on the inside. You want 3 to 7 thousandths is what the book calls for. And by looking, I can tell I've got too much. And right here, this is a 15 thousandths, and it goes in, but it's snug. So we need to remove about 7-8 thousandths worth of shims. So if we take the 9 thousandth out, 16 that would put us at 7 thousandths, which says 3 to 7. So I mean, actually, that would be good. Because it and this very thinnest shim together, well, that's 11 thousandths. That'd be fine. I tell you what, I want to leave both of them out. Yeah, let's leave both of them out. So let's put it back together yet once again. Alright, got it back together once again. And we got 4 thousandths of clearance. So we're good. We can now put the rest of it together. Plus, you also need to remember that once you crank this engine and everything breaks in, you're going to gain a little more clearance as soon as everything breaks in. So, if you're worried about it being too tight, don't worry about that. Alright, got the cam gear started. Get a block of wood and tap it on up on there. Now let's put a little Loctite on the end of the camshaft. Because you definitely don't want the camshaft nut coming loose. Because actually if that nut comes loose, the camshaft will come forward and it shoves the distributor out. And now we've got our Loctite on. Go ahead and set our governor plate on. And then torque it to 75 pounds. Well, actually the book says 60 to 80. I'm going with 75. And do not overdo it, because if you overdo it, the end of the camshaft will snap off. Put a little lube right here on the governor, or the governor bell, cup, whatever you want to call it. And put a little bit on the governor balls. Alright, I think we're ready to drop some pistons in it. Alright, get a lint-free rag, and I'm using paint reducer. I've washed these sleeves once, but it never hurts to go over them again. See, it's still getting crap out of it. Now, just so you know, I did run a hone through these sleeves, but you can't do it while the sleeves are in the block. You have to do them when they're out of the block and basically hold the sleeve by hand, because if you try to do it when it's in the block, the sleeve will just sit here and spin. So, just a heads up on that. Now, you can see I've got the piston and rings soaking in oil. I'll set it down here. So we need to get half a rod bearing. These are perfect circle rod bearings. I like to use perfect circle stuff because they make a perfect circle. Get the assembly lube out. Hey, look at that. That makes the perfect holder. Alright. Assembly lube on it. Now, I've done staggered the rings. Do you remember which way I said the rods go? Was you paying attention? Remember, the hole goes away from the camshaft, so it would go this way. I confused myself there. Because the engine's been upside down for so long. Anyway, the oil hole, not the hole. You can turn your hole whichever way you want to. The oil hole goes away from the camshaft. And make sure that you stagger your rings, because if you don't, it will smoke worse than your mother-in-law after Thanksgiving dinner. There's one piston. Now reach under here. Little assembly lube. You'll notice I double check myself several times. That's not a bad thing to do, to always double check yourself. Now I'm not going to torque them just yet, but I'm just going to snug them down. Because the thing is, once you got the pistons in the engine, you can't turn the engine over, because it'll shut the sleeves up out of the block. Now, if you're wondering why I'm reusing these rings, look, they still have the paint mark on them from when they was new. So I mean, literally, they're not broken in. They came on these pistons when I bought them, so why not use them? And there's the last rod and piston then. Let's go through and torque the connecting rods. Start off at 25. Now we'll go up to 45. One thing you will have to do is, number number one, don't drop your hammer down in the engine. So fold these little tabs up again. I'll do the other two when we can turn the crank, and they're at the bottom. Now some paint thinner, or brake cleaner, carb cleaner, whatever you prefer to use. Clean the deck of the block. Because you know you're going to have oil on it where we drove these pistons in. Now this step right here is totally up to you, but I like to do it. The little copper spray on the gasket, on the head gasket, I mean. Now while we're waiting on the copper on the head gasket to dry, I'll put a little, this is a oops, and I'm dripping it everywhere. This is some old Permatex. I like to put a little bit around the water openings, just in case, you know, there's been some corrosion in it, you know, made some pits in the metal. Now a little bit on the back of the water pump housing. If I can hit the hole. Now we got the head gasket on. We're going to drop the head on. Alright, let's torque the cylinder head down. I'm going to start off at 40 pounds. Of course, just like any other cylinder head, start in the middle. Now here's where I get a lot of questions, is on the nuts down in here. Well, number one, take a boxed in wrench and get it, you know, tight as you think it needs to be. Now we're going to torque it. What I do, see this, that's a 11/16 boxed in wrench and a socket that I drilled a hole through and then cut the wrench in half and welded it in there. All you got to do, put it on your torque wrench at a 90-degree angle. It cannot affect the torque setting at a 90-degree. Now if I had it out like that, yes, because that's extra leverage. Now you can do the math and add this in and then set the torque wrench accordingly. But why bother? Just turn it to a 90-degree and then torque it. See there? That's all there is to it. Now I want to go ahead and do the rest of them. Now I'll go back through and do them all at between 70 and 75. Now let's put the timing cover on it, but before you do, make sure, see this tab sticking out on the governor? Turn it to about 8 o'clock. Looks like 8 o'clock to me. There we go. Alright, even though normally I don't do this, I never add safety wire back. But I figure if I didn't, some of you would start screaming about it. Saying, you didn't safety wire it. Well, in my honest opinion, I think the only reason that these are safety wired is because Continental was big into the aircraft industry, or airplane engines. And of course, everything on an airplane engine is safety wired, and that's my honest opinion. I think that's why these are safety wired. I mean, if the bolt wants to loosen, it's going to loosen. The wire just keeps it from falling completely out. But it ain't going to keep it torqued, you know? Now, am I great at safety wire? Nope. That's what they make Loctite for. But at least now nobody can holler that I didn't do it. Now when you go to put your oil pump pickup on, make sure that that big O-ring right there is there. Now before we drop the oil pan on, there's two things left that we have to do. Number one, we've got to put the rear main seal on, which is this. I put a new seal in it. I got the gasket glued on the back. Because remember, there's two bolts. They go from the inside. Now the last thing, before we put the oil pan on, we've got to put the side seals in, which is cotton rope. Now, some people like to pack it in there just plain. I always like to put a little sealer on it just in case. Let some run down in there. Just like that. And then when we put the oil pan gasket on, I'll put a little silicone over it. Now repeat on the other side. Alright, fill that in a little bit of silicone. A little bit up here. See, this oil pan gasket is made for both the Z129 engine and the Z134 engine that was used on the 35. That's why it's got these kickouts right here. You can leave them or you can trim them off. Either way, it's up to you. Personally, they irritate me. And now, oil pan. Alright, got the oil filter housing on, so let's stick an oil filter in it. Now normally I always use AGCO filters, but right now we got a Wix filter, which it's okay since we're going to run the engine, then drain the oil out of it and change the filter anyway. And then we'll put an AGCO filter in it, because AGCO is a better filter. Believe it or not, it is a better made filter than Wix. Now, I don't know who makes them for AGCO, but I'm just telling you, they're made to AGCO specs, and they're a better made filter. I did make some new washers for this bolt that holds the lid on. That's a copper washer and then a fiber washer. Then make sure that your rubber seal is up in the lid, and make sure there's only one, because sometimes people screw up and they'll not get the old one out, and then they'll have a massive leak and wonder why. Almost forgot. Before you put that on, there's a felt dust seal. It goes right there. Now we can put this on. Now then, let's drop the push rods back in it. Put a little dab of assembly lube on the ends of all the valves. Now you notice some of these have holes in the ends of the valve stem and some don't. Well, there's valve caps that go on there. Put a little bit in the ends of the push rods. I see some of these have, looks like a little pin, and some are just a recessed cap. And go back and put a little smear on the top of the valve caps, or lash caps. Now, get the rough arm assembly and set it on. You don't want to tighten it all the way down at once. Just do each one just a little bit. Draw them down evenly. Otherwise you can bend the shaft. Ford FEs are notorious for that. If you tighten one side down all at once and then go to the other end, they'll bend the shaft. Alright, I went ahead and stuck the manifold gasket on there. So now let's stick the manifold on. Which this is the first two-piece manifold I've ever had. Which I'm just sticking it on there. We're not bolting it down yet. There's a reason. Because I need to mark which valve is what. So you can see this is the exhaust. So E, I. I, E, and let's see, E, I. Where's the other side? And then I, and then E. So we got E, I, E, E, I, E. Two intakes together, two intakes together. That's the way it's supposed to be. The reason we want to do it is so we can adjust the valves. The old way of doing it was bring every cylinder to top dead center and then adjust the valves. I like to do it the more modern way of adjusting the valves, which is turn the motor over till the exhaust valve starts to open and you adjust the intake. Okay, then you continue turning the motor over till the intake valve fully opens and then starts going back closed. When it's about halfway back to closing or a little more, adjust the exhaust. Doing it that way makes sure that the lifter is on the back side of the cam, because you don't want to adjust the valves when it's on the low or your valve setting's not going to be right. So let's adjust the valves. Okay, and you can see here the intake valve starting to open on number 1. So make sure it's fully open and almost all the way back closed. Now we'll adjust the exhaust. Okay, the manual calls for 13 thousandths hot, 15 thousandths cold. That's because when everything gets hot, it expands. I want to split the difference. Oh, and that's on the intake and exhaust. It's the same for both. I'm going to split the difference and go with 14. We've got way too much lash there. Just tighten the screw down back here. You feel a slight drag. Feel the drag, tighten the lock nut down, you're done. Now we turn the motor over. Now the exhaust valve's starting to open, so we'll adjust the intake. That one doesn't have enough lash. See, ideally, if everything is good in the motor, the screws where they stick up are all going to be fairly similar. If you see one that is adjusted way down more than the other one or way up more than the other one, that means you've got a problem with a valve or a lifter or a lobe on the camshaft. Like I said, they don't have to be identical, but they should be similar. Cylinder's done, so we go on to the next cylinder. Just keep doing the same thing. Exhaust valve starts to open, adjust the intake. When the intake fully opens and starts going back closed, adjust the exhaust. Alright, tighten the manifold up, which it helps if you got a box stand and an open-end wrench, because you're more than likely you'll need an open-end in the middle. Which some of you may have noticed, this is a later 35 style manifold. So this tractor's had the original manifold replaced, because the original TO-20, TO-30 Continental manifold, actually the exhaust was on top and the intake was about where the exhaust is here, but that would cause the gas tank to get hot. That TO-30 I grew up with, I've actually had the gas boil in the tank before. So when they come out with the 35, they redesign the manifold and the intake is on top and the exhaust is moved down to the middle, so it puts more space between the exhaust and the gas tank. It still gets the gas tank hot, but it does help. I'm freshening up an old used pressure plate. I've already surfaced the flywheel. Now, if your pressure plate's got cracks in it, or your flywheel has cracks in it, or hot spots, don't reuse it. But you can see this one doesn't. It's still good, and the flywheel's good, so we're okay there. Now don't forget your pilot bearing, which TO-30s used a bushing, 20s used a bearing. It's actually recommended in the original Ferguson manual to use the bushing for heavy duty service, but it's hard to find the bushing anymore, so we'll use a bearing. It's just a regular old 6203 bearing. Alright, got the flywheel on. Its flywheel will only fit one way. little Loctite on each of these. And each one of these has one of them washers with teeth on them. Now torque each one of them 50 foot-pounds. Now here's the fun part. Not really. Let's put the clutch and pressure plate on. I didn't have a clutch alignment tool for this thing. I got thinking, wait a minute, I've got an extra input shaft. They don't make a better alignment tool than the input shaft. So, what we're going to do, put the pressure plate on. Then put the clutch disc on, which this is an old used clutch disc. Now, some manuals have you put blocks of wood and stuff in here to block these fingers. What it is, the pressure plate will hold back off the flywheel. I use a bolt that's threaded all the way up in a nut. Basically, it's not going to let you start the original bolts. They're too short, because you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but it's about half an inch from the face of the flywheel right now. But I start these bolts. Put one. At each corner, I guess you'd call it. What I do is tighten the nuts down against the pressure plate and slowly draw it down a little bit at a time, and then start the original bolts in. Now if you get the original bolts in, or if you just pull these back out and put the original bolts back in their spot. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now go around and torque all your pressure plate bolts to, it says between 10 and 12, which I'm using a little inch-pound torque wrench, so it'll be, there's 12 inch-pounds and a foot-pound, so it would be 144 inch-pounds. Now the only other thing that you need to do is set the finger height of the clutch. The Ferguson calls for 1 13/16 of an inch from the face of the flywheel. So you just take the lock nut loose and adjust this screw in and out until it's just barely touching. If you're wondering, I made this gauge out of a piece of wood. Hey, it is what it is, but it works. Now I've got two bolts I cut the heads off of screwed in here to act as studs to guide it together. So let's see what happens here. You can pull forward a little bit and let it down. Oh, we're almost there. One thing I meant to tell you, take the transmission out of gear, but put the power takeoff in gear. That way when you're trying to line the input shaft and the splines in the clutch disc up, go back there and turn your power takeoff shaft and see it turns the main input shaft and it'll line the splines up and drop together. Looks like I need to raise the motor up just a hair. There it is. It's together. Woohoo! Now just remember, before you tighten the bell housing bolts down, slide that cover plate back in, because it goes in up from the bottom, and if you got these tightened down, you can't get it in. Well, I've never been able to anyway. So now let me tighten all them bolts up and the bell housing bolts up. Alright, what we're going to do now, I've run a jumper wire from the coil. I want to hook it up to the battery. I've got the distributor loose. I've got the flywheel set, because there's marks on the flywheel. You look actually through this hole right here. You can see it through the starter, but that's the wrong spot. You need it in this hole down here. And it needs to, there's a little notch right there, and it needs to say 6 degrees before top dead center. Now what you do, with your distributor loose, and the power hooked up to the coil, you sit here and turn the distributor till you see a spark. When that spark plug sparks, stop. And then don't lock the distributor down, but just tighten it down enough where you can still turn it by hand if you need to once it cranks, but you don't want it just loose. And then you know you're pretty well in time, because you got the timing mark here and you got a spark there. So let's put the spark plug in. Let's put some oil in it. For oil, I'm using Mobile Delvac straight 30. Why? Because it's on sale. Straight 30 is what most of these old tractors was ran on anyway back in the day. And straight 30 is also good for breaking engines in. So it's a double whammy. And Mobile Delvac is good oil. What we're going to do, I want to see if this thing will fire off just for a few seconds. See if it builds oil pressure. And see if I hear any noises or anything. We're not going to run it long since we don't have the cooling system on it yet. But before I do all that, I want to make sure that it's going to run and has oil pressure. Alright, I say before I stick the front axle back on it, let's crank it over and see what happens. Hopefully it runs, and hopefully we've got oil pressure. I've got one bolt holding the tank on. Because who knows, it may have to come right back off. Turn the fuel on. Yeah. I just run a jumper wire down the coil. See what happens. How about that? Got good oil pressure too. Let's try it again. Bring a little back. So that being said, I think we're safe to put the front axle back under it now. Let's go get the front axle. Excuse me while I go cuss for a minute. Don't forget your shim goes in between the front axle, holster, and the engine block. Alright, now let's hook our radius arm up. Get out of the way. There we go. Just need to turn the wheel a little bit. I'll probably have to do that by hand. Like I said, yours may have shims in here when you take it apart. If it does, make sure you put the shims back. Alright, I got the generator on it. Now, this is just a personal pet peeve of mine. Has nothing to do with building this tractor, because if you remember, this one and the other one both had an alternator on them when I got them. I just personally don't like the look of an alternator. But if you're okay with the alternator, by all means, use an alternator. It's simpler and, well, really they're more reliable. But I like the look of a generator. I try to keep them original looking. So, that's why you see a generator on here now instead of the alternator. So with that being said, let's put the radiator on it. Let's see. Get that out of the way. Set the shroud up on here. Now before we tighten everything down, it makes it easier if you go ahead and put your upper radiator hose on. As you can see, this one has a thermostat in it. So we're going to try it. Don't know if thermostat's good or not, but we'll see what happens. If you remember, this tractor had one of these on it. I absolutely hate and despise those things. Because what they do, where they're so stiff, they end up breaking the outlets on the radiator where they're constantly pulling against it where they're so strong. So I try to never use those. Now we can tighten the radiator down. Now let's put some water in it. We're just going to use water right now. Which before I pour this in, there's some of you going to say, well, that just looks like old rainwater you're pouring in it. Well, let me explain it to you. It is rainwater I'm pouring in it. At the time that I'm doing this, we just had Hurricane Helene come through. And nobody here has any water. It took bridges and stuff out, took buildings out, destroyed the lines. So nobody has any water. So I literally set buckets out here to catch rainwater just to be able to do this. So that's why. And there is a strainer in the bottom of this funnel to catch any sediment. Now I'm going to go back and get another bucket of rainwater. Alright, I'm fixing to crank this thing up. Because remember, we had the two cracks in the bottom of the block. So I'm going to pour this Barslick liquid copper in it. And I've always had good luck with that stuff. I pour it in and leave it in. So let's crank this thing so it can circulate the water through it. Well, let's check it out and see if we got a clutch. Yep. Hey, looky here. Still got good oil pressure. Well, I'm pretty pleased with it. I gotta put the hood back on it, of course, but now you might see it smoke just a little bit, and it freaked me out at first because I thought there's something wrong with the motor, and then I remembered that exhaust came off that tractor over there that had the stuck ring, so the exhaust is full of oil. So it'll take a little while for it to burn the oil out of the exhaust. I thought there's something wrong with it. The reason I didn't use the exhaust off this tractor, somebody put a glass pack on it. I just put back like what's supposed to be on it. So there's nothing wrong with the motor. Because I was freaking out at first too. It's fine. I'm just letting it sit here and idle. If you're wondering why I put this red hood on it rather than the gray hood, well, look at the grill and stuff on this one. And then if you look at the gray hood, number one, it's been mudded really heavy. They've mudded the dog legs and the hood together on it, and they've squashed the grill flat. That's why I put the red hood on it rather than the gray hood. But we can fix it. We can fix the red hood. We can spray it gray. Ain't a big deal. Tomorrow we'll give it the real test. We'll actually hook it up to something and work it and see how it does. I'll see you tomorrow. Alright, let's put it to the test. Pull the 2-bottom plow. Second gear. And we're just slightly above an idle. Let's see how it does. So did we meet our goal? Well, that first tractor was $400. The other tractor, a friend of mine had it, and we wheel and deal all the time, and I got that tractor from him. So it come out about $950. You know, all that's getting the tractor parts and everything, because I had about $350 in parts. And but that's actually higher than normal, because on average, if you're just giving scrap price, these tractors only weigh 2,900 pounds. At $7 a hundred, you know, that's $203 if you're giving actual scrap price for them, which most people will. And some people get them cheaper than that. I've known people that give these tractors away because they don't think that they're worth anything, and they're probably not worth anything to them. But that doesn't mean that they're scrap, and it doesn't mean that they're worthless. Now, if you're wondering how I was able to go through this engine so cheap, well, I use the same exact methods that I showed you in that one video of mine about a year and a half ago on how to save money on car parts. You get a list of part numbers and start cross-referencing, because people sell stuff every day not knowing what it is. Like, for example, the main bearings in that motor. Okay, if you go on Steiner or one of them right now, the main bearings are $210 a set. I get $45 for that set of Michigan main bearings. That's a big difference. But yeah, I come out right at $350 in parts. So we actually was able to fix the tractor, go through the engine and everything. Now I have a 36 horse tractor that runs like a top and have less than $1,000 total in it. So I think that's pretty dang good. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you that watch, that like, subscribe, comment. Me and the pups, we really appreciate you. So, before we leave this video, for anybody that hadn't, make sure and hit the thumbs up, like, subscribe, and stay tuned. I'll be back with some more. And remember, you can always trust in the good Lord and Mr. Ford, and listen to more Goose Creek. See you.